one of the feedbacks I continuously have is that science and spirituality, they don't mix.
I looked at the cognitive science behind things like manifestation, abundance, visualization, and it's actually obvious that your brain is doing this. It's really kind of living in accordance with what it is that you say you want. It's got to be magnetic desire, which is a true alignment in your head, your heart, and your gut. The visualization piece is because the brain doesn't differentiate very much between something that's actually happened and something that we imagine and see happening in our mind. Some people cannot visualize. There's a neurological syndrome called aphantasia.
Dr. Tara, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I don't know if you know, I recorded a video about your book, The Source, about 11 months ago. And I checked today and it has already had 420,000 views.
Oh my goodness.
With numerous messages. I hope you can introduce yourself to my audience, even though a lot of them already watched my previous video. Can you talk a little bit about your background, what you do, and what led you to write this book, The Source?
I went to medical school when I was 18. And then I thought I wanted to become a neurologist. So I took 3 years out to do a PhD in neuroscience. And then I went back to medical school to the practical part and realized that I preferred psychiatry to neurology because it was more people skills. And I just found it fascinating how your own brain can play tricks on you. And, you can sort of like lose your sense of perception, or your mood can change, or you can hear voices that aren't there. I just thought that was really fascinating. So I became a psychiatrist. I was a doctor for 7 years. And then I started to feel like my career wasn't going to change much in the next 30 or 40 years. And I love change. And, in those days, we didn't even really know about neuroplasticity. But now that I know about neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to grow and change when you learn new things and you do different things, it's very me. So I changed career. I became an executive coach. And then a few years later, neuroscience became a really interesting topic for business and leadership. So then I started speaking and I wrote a book called Neuroscience for Leadership. I started teaching at MIT, which is a university in America. And yeah, my career's really evolved since then because I had in my personal life a spiritual aspect. I've got Indian parents. I was brought up with meditation and yoga and incense, but I always thought that that couldn't be part of my professional life. But when I wrote The Source and I researched the laws of attraction and manifestation and visualization, and I looked a bit into Buddhism and Jungian psychology, that's when I first brought the two parts of my life together. And the response to The Source has been so great. I mean, it's available in 38 languages. And I'm thrilled, obviously, that now it's available in Taiwan. And it really made me realize that I could have science and spirituality in my personal life and my professional life. So, yeah, that's kind of where we're at by now, I think.
That's wonderful because in my channel, I talk about applied psychology. And one of the feedbacks I continuously have is that science and spirituality, they don't mix. And that this isn't science. What you're talking about isn't science. This is superstition or whatnot. So a lot of times when I talk about manifestation or visualization, I get that response. I will say it's not the majority, but right now I see the polarization, just like everything else. It's either you're a believer or you're not. And I do want to address a lot of things you wrote in your book, the mechanic of it. But before we go any further, let's address all these non-believers who don't think this is real. One of the messages I thought was funny, it was like, this is the introduction to a cult. And I thought that, yes. So people feel very strongly about it. And the more I read, the more I realized why. So here are some of the messages. I've categorized them into 3 categories. So the non-believers is 1. Well, I want to win the lottery and I haven't won that, right? So that type of, well, I want everything. I want a yacht. I want a huge mansion. Yeah, like I can visualize that. So that's 1. And 2 is I tried it and it didn't work for me. And therefore, I don't think it's real. And number three, really, it's more of a scholarly vantage point. Like, well, it's not scientifically proven. And so that's why I was so excited when your book came out. I was like, here, look, here are the science, right? So can we talk to these non-believers? Like, well, I want to win the lottery, but
Mm.
obviously I haven't. How do we talk to these people? Because I do believe understanding the concept will help them, but they need to first not resist the idea so much.
Yeah. I understand that point of view because there's a lot of talk out there about frequencies and vibrations and the universe, sort of things that feel intangible, that can't be measured and therefore can't be proven, and, mixed up with a lot of kind of what we would call woo-woo wording.
Hmm.
So when I started to research for the source, I looked at the 12 laws of attraction. There isn't even agreement about what those 12 are. So, already you could see why someone would say, like, it's not an agreed thing. But I
Hmm.
looked at the cognitive science behind things like manifestation, abundance, visualization, and it's actually obvious that your brain is doing this. And I find that more empowering than saying the universe is sending it to you. If you
Mm.
know that you train your brain to like set goals and do whatever you need to reach those goals, that means you've got agency, you're in control of your life. It's not just like sitting at home creating a fantasy and waiting for it to come true.
Right.
Um, and the thing about the lottery is I've got a real life example of that, which is that I interviewed Tamara Mellon, the shoe designer, for I think this was on Instagram Live, and she said that she had manifested her house in the Hamptons on the east coast of America. And of course, there were comments like, "Oh, well, I would love a house in the Hamptons," but Tamara worked extremely hard and raised investment and made her business successful. So House in the Hamptons was relevant to her situation, her financial abundance, her level of success. With people like us, we have to kind of start smaller because it's got to be realistic and something that you can actually achieve. Once you start manifesting things, then you can make bigger goals and you just have that confidence in your ability to do it. And it is actually measurable and provable because it's based on neuroplasticity, which is a four-step process where you raise awareness of what it is that you want to achieve. You give yourself evidence that you can achieve these things.
Hmm.
You then deliberately make actions that will help you to bring those things into your life, and you hold yourself accountable. And so for me, the way to hold myself accountable is this what is known as vision boards, but I call them action boards because you create imagery of what it is that you want to bring into your life, but you also have to do the right things. Like if it's a husband, then you've got to be dating. If
Hmm.
it's your own freelance career, then you've got to quit your job and start kind of networking. Or let's say if it's having children, then you need to be taking the right vitamins, meeting somebody who wants to have a family with you rather than going out partying all the time. So it's really kind of living in accordance with what it is that you say you want. But so the whole like I want a mansion and I want a yacht is there's got to be magnetic desire, which is a true alignment in your head, your heart, and your gut, that these are the things that you want, that you're prepared to work hard for and patiently wait for. If you feel like, oh, well, all my friends are getting married and having babies, so I should do that, but it's not actually what you really want, that's often the reason that it doesn't work. The other reason that for I tried it, but it didn't work is that it takes time. When you are changing your mindset, when you are trying to reach a goal, it's very hard physical work, not just psychological work, because nerve cells in your brain are making new connections. They're building thicker pathways. They're becoming more efficient through myelination, which is a fatty substance that makes pathways work quicker. And what often happens is people feel tired from the hard work and then they give up just before they would have actually reached their goal.
Hmm.
I love this imagery of a man digging for gold. And we can see that the gold is just one more dig away, but he's like been digging for so long, he says it didn't work and I'm going to give up.
Hmm. Well, so many questions that come with that, but thank you so much. I think a few points that you brought up, I think it's definitely worth for us to try is building that momentum. It's gaining that small wins. Let's say if I want to lose 10 kilograms, I got to start small. Like it's not going to happen overnight. So you have to work really hard. You said that neuroscience perspective, intention and action must go together. It's not just sitting here saying stuff, but you got to work hard towards your goal. And I love that you talked about true alignment. You talked about head, heart, and gut. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I have realized before I turned 40, mostly I only used my head. And I
Ooh.
don't think that's uncommon. And
Yeah.
so it's only until I started to integrate the three that really good things started happening. So
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about that and the exercises that we can do to train ourselves to listen to our head, heart, and gut?
Yes. So by head, heart, and gut, I mean logical thinking, emotional thinking, and intuition. But actually, in the book, I write about 6 ways of thinking. So I also add in creative thinking, your physicality, so listening to your body, messages from your body, and motivators and demotivators. So knowing what it is that really motivates you to keep going when you feel like giving up, and what it is that drains you. But let's focus on those three because there are some really nice exercises. So basically, if those three are all in alignment, if your logic tells you this is the right decision, if your emotions feel like, yeah, this is feeling positive emotions like trusting yourself, trusting the universe, if that's the kind of language you want to use, and your intuition, which is all the wisdom that you hold in your mind and your body based on everything that you've experienced in life. So obviously, we don't remember everything we've experienced, but these patterns get laid down in our brain, like in the logical part of our brain. And then over time, through a process called Hebbian learning, which is named after the neuroscientist Donald Hebb. And the easiest way to understand what that means is neurons that fire together wire together. So the more you experience something, the more deeply held it is in your brain and your body. So our intuition is in our limbic system, which is the ancient structures of the brain. It's about the size of your clenched fist, in our brainstem, in our spinal cord, and in our gut neurons. And that's why intuition is often called gut instinct. So if they're all aligned, that's great. But if one of them is off, like, you said that you think until you were 40, you mostly thought logically. So what I see with people there is that your gut is telling you something really strongly, but you override that with your logic because you think, well,
It's not
if I make the wrong,
logical.
yeah, exactly. And then I'll blame myself if it turns out to be the wrong decision. But so the first thing I suggest is to journal your decision making and your dilemmas and write down what your logic is telling you, what your emotions are telling you, and what your intuition is telling you. And in a low risk environment, go with your intuition, even if your logic is telling you not to, and just see what happens and journal about that.
Mm.
It's a really lovely exercise that isn't in the source, but it's in my next book, which is coming out in
Oh,
September.
I'm excited for it.
Yeah. It's called unfurling. And so basically, you ask yourself this question that you're having to make a decision about. And then you take 5 deep breaths and you answer from your logical head and you write down the answer. Then you do another 5 deep breaths and you put your hands on your heart and you answer from your emotions, write that down. Another 5 deep breaths, hands on your belly, and you answer from your intuition. And then you look at the three answers and you kind of combine them to help you to make the best decision, like a fully rounded decision, not just a logical one. Because I think for people like you who are really intelligent and successful and rely on your brain very much, you might say, well, there's no place for emotions in the workplace or in like big decisions in my life, but you're actually disregarding data that your brain is trying to give you because logic can't exist without emotion. So it kind of doesn't actually make sense if you think of it logically.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I worked in advertising before when I first came out of college. So you'd think I know because advertising is about selling desires, not products, right? So it is about feelings. But when it came to my own life, somehow the head overrides everything. Now, I'll share with you a very quick example. I opened up a little cake store when I was pregnant with my first child. And actually, I found out I was pregnant right when I was about to sign the lease. And I kid you not, on my way over to sign the lease, I could have sworn I heard a voice saying, don't do it.
Mm.
I remember exactly when it happened. And to this day, I don't know if I heard a voice or it was my gut
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah.
But I stopped and it was in front of a McDonald's that no longer exists. Remember exactly where it happened, but I went ahead in anyway. And it ended up being like a really horrible idea. I was overwhelmed. It wasn't something that I was really interested in. It was something that people thought I could do during
Mm.
that time. So I always talk about that experience because it's one time that I know I ignored my physical, like emotional data. Like I
Mm.
ignored important data and only used my head. And that led to, in hindsight, a bad decision. And which is why your book really resonates. And I do want to share it to the non believers because when you don't believe, you're not going to find out more information about it. I really just want to explain to people so that they could at least open up their mind and really listen to the science behind it. And I think your book definitely will help a lot of people. And one other thing that came up while you were talking about digging for gold and almost getting it, and that's it, because it's such hard work, you quit. I do want to ask you about that because there is also a book called Quit. It's the art of quitting, like knowing when to give up.
Mhm.
She is a renowned poker player. And she does
Mhm.
talk about gut feelings a lot too, because our society talks about grit a lot, perseverance, and holding on and continue to do the hard work. But there are times that things aren't just right for you. Like
Yeah.
it is okay to fold. How do you know the difference? Or should we just do that exercises of head, heart, and gut? Would that help?
Yeah, I think that exercise would help, but I think also we have to understand the balance between perseverance and sunk cost fallacy.
Hmm.
It's a behavioral economics term,
Yes.
which is when you've invested so much in something, I don't know whether it feels like a failure or wrong to give up because you've already put in so much money or so much effort or whatever it is. But the sunk cost is that okay, you've done the effort that you've done, but if you just keep doing more and it's not leading to a result, it's actually not worth it. And I think in that respect, it's probably, as humans, we don't exist like islands. We have our community and our tribe around us, and it can be really helpful to have a conversation with people and say, this was a dream. I've spent years trying to make it come true. It hasn't come true. What do you think? I find it really useful to have, if I can't come to a decision by myself, I choose three people who I know will give me really honest and different
Hmm.
opinions, and I ask them. And it's not always the same people. And sometimes you can do it in your mind, like fictional mentors. You could ask like a historical character that you admire. You could ask, a grandparent that's passed away or a famous person whose, personality you think understand the way that they think,
Hmm.
and ask the question to them. But obviously, it's still coming from your own intuition.
Right.
Um, but it's a different perspective. It's a bit like how you would give your own sister different advice to what you give to yourself. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Just that one step away.
Yes. Oh, that's great advice. That's a great advice because sometimes when you're in too deep, you talk about sunk cost fallacy, you're so emotionally involved that you sort of block out a lot of important data. And
Yeah.
that's when people who know you maybe could give you advice, or maybe at that point they'll know you better than yourself, right?
Yeah. There's the other phrase, you don't know what you don't know.
Right, right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I like to get into the neuroscience part of the law of attraction and manifestation. Can you briefly explain to the non-neuroscience audience a simple way, simpler way of explaining how does that work? When we focus on something, visualize something, why is that helpful for us to manifest what we want?
So the visualization piece is because the brain doesn't differentiate very much between something that's actually happened and something that we imagine and see happening in our mind. Now, I want to make the point that some people cannot visualize. There's a neurological syndrome called aphantasia, where, like, let's say I said to you, okay, visualize an apple. So you might see a very clear picture of a green or red apple, like you would see it in your fruit bowl in your kitchen. Some people would see a sort of round blob, and some people just can't see anything. And that's why I like the vision board, because then you're actually looking at the image. You don't have to necessarily see it in your mind's eye, but you can do either. So looking at images or visualizing something that you want makes it feel familiar to the brain, because the brain actually doesn't like change or new things and will try to avoid that. Anything new is seen as a threat. But it's interesting because habituation is things that you get used to, and saliency is like the novelty of something you've not noticed before. And it's actually very good for your brain. But the problem is our brain wants to protect us for survival. Our brain doesn't want us to take risks that might lead to, like, you know, that mansion or that yacht, because it feels like there's danger. So the first thing we need to do is override this default wiring of the brain, which is that the brain is 2.5 times more strongly geared to avoid loss than it is to get reward. Now, when we lived in cave times, that would have protected us from being eaten up by a wolf. But in these days, we don't have as many physical threats to our safety, but we've got a lot of potential psychological threats to our safety, like your husband might leave you, or you might lose your job, or, you know, you might have to, like, downsize to a smaller house. These are the threats that we, you know, really care about now. So understanding that in this modern world, we're fortunate if we're pretty safe physically, that we can afford to take some healthy risks and override that gearing of the brain and live from abundance rather than scarcity.
Taking healthy risk. That's, I think, the key message there, because really I've noticed my own brain sometimes cannot distinguish what's healthy and what's just not, right? Because we always tell people don't be too impulsive, right? You can't just do whatever you want whenever you want. That's our training, especially I think in Asia. I think we are very used to suppressing that, but getting reconnected to it and finding that boundary, I think it's difficult for a lot of us. And I especially like to talk about the part you talked about. Losses have twice as powerful an effect on our brains than the equivalent gain. I think this is wonderful for people to know, because with a lot of online presence and kids and young adults or even older adults using social media, I think we're so focused on the negative side, like the attacks, the criticisms, rather than what we already have. And so that gets amplified. Your book explains that from a neurological perspective, like why it does it. And I think it's helpful for people to understand it so that we're not focused on what's dangerous. We're not constantly in surviving mode.
I'm glad you raised that issue of social media, because the fact is, if you get 100 comments on a post and 99 of them are good, but one is negative, that's the one you'll remember when you go to bed at night. That is, how our brains work. But it's generally in life, but particularly with social media, being more internally validated is really important. And that's why I think that when I wrote about how it's your brain that brings these things into your life, it makes you feel powerful. It makes you feel resourceful. And so gratitude lists are a really important part of building that resilience. So when I first started doing gratitude lists, I was journaling, and each day would write 10 things I'm grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't notice this at the time, but they were all external things. They were like friends, family, travel, education, intelligence. But then I just kind of actually just got bored of writing the same things pretty much every day, because I couldn't really think of that many new ones. So I turned it inward, and I wrote about my resilience and my vulnerability and my creativity. And what that built in me, because obviously the book starts after I first got divorced, is that it built this ability for me to understand that whatever situation I'm in, I can work my way out of it. And now I don't just do gratitude as a practice. When I feel like at my worst, or I've got a really difficult decision, or I'm in a difficult situation, that's when I say, okay, say 10 things you're grateful for. And it changes my mindset to abundance so quickly. Now, it may be obviously I've trained myself in gratitude for, at least a decade, but I would love your listeners to try that, when they feel really low, to name 10 things they're grateful for and see like what effect that has. And then that's obviously from the source. But in my new book, which is going to be called The Signs, I've talked about the importance of beauty, particularly in nature, as a way to create the same abundant mindset. And so, if you look at the spring blossoms or you look at the autumn leaves, or, it doesn't have to be nature, it could be an impressive building or a statue or something. And you say, oh my goodness, that's so beautiful. I'm in awe of how beautiful this thing is. It has the same neurological effect as gratitude because it increases this hormone, oxytocin,
Mm-hmm.
that's to do with love and trust and joy and excitement. And when you have high oxytocin, you can't have high cortisol, the stress hormone, at the same time. So all of these things are helping us to be in the abundant mindset, not in the stressed and scarcity mindset.
That's wonderful. And I did not know you were writing your second book, and I did not know it's called The Signs. But before I came over to record, I was meditating outside on my balcony, and two birds flew in, and I took a picture of it. I'd love to share with you later. And I was just in awe. And they looked at me and I looked at them and I thought, well, this is a great sign. Like, hello, birds.
Yeah.
Um, so I was in a really wonderful mood coming over because I live on the 14th floor. And so it's not often that I have birds coming to my balcony and really staying there and just looking at me while I was meditating. I'd opened my eyes and there they were. So I thought that was wonderful. Anyway, somehow I think it's somewhat correlated with
Yeah, it's giving me chills.
yeah, there is some kind of connection, and you were talking about the signs and seeing the beauty in nature, and I just thought I definitely need to share that with you.
That's amazing. I mean, we're not obviously not really supposed to be talking about the new book because it's not out yet, but I have found that once you start living with signs, life is just never the same again. It changes everything. But I want to share a really interesting statistic with you about, well, it's
Yeah.
not a fact about birds. So in ancient times in nature, birds would only sing if there were no predators around. If they could see a predator, they would go silent to protect themselves.
Right.
So even now, like millennia on from like when we lived with nature in that way, when we hear birdsong, our blood pressure goes down and our stress hormone levels go down because we know we're safe.
Wow. That is so interesting. I wow, that's wonderful. And I will tell you a little bit later about how I manifested a lot of things and why I feel a little bit stuck right now, which is why I started the daily meditation again. But I did want to follow up on the gratitude list, because you mentioned something that it hadn't occurred to me before. Because whenever I feel down, I start my list. But you are absolutely right. All the list does include they're in external things.
Yeah.
Like, I am grateful for this beautiful place I live in. I'm grateful for my balcony. I'm grateful for the bookshelves or whatnot. But I don't think I've ever, now that I think about it, written anything down about myself that I
I
need
would
to
love
be
you,
thankful for.
I would love you to start giving gratitude for your intuition because I don't think you understand how amazing it is. And if you did, you would use it more. The balance between your intuition and your logic could change if you continually give gratitude for the fact that actually you do have that voice that you can hear.
Right. I think a lot of us, when we are down, you look around your life, it's like, well, I'm practically starving. I can't afford this. Nothing's going well. How do I start a gratitude list when I feel like crap? And I so hate the world right now. And then a lot of people feel that way because they don't feel accepted for a variety of reasons. Maybe they were bullied at work or school, or their parents don't accept them for who they are. How can we get these people to start the gratitude list when they're in such a dark and negative place?
Yeah, I'm really glad you raised that because I feel like for various reasons since the pandemic, people seem to be more lost and lonely and disconnected than ever,
Yes.
even though technology should mean that we're more connected than ever. It's actually kind of had the opposite effect. And I think the fact that we've broken our bond with nature. So a lot of
Mm,
indigenous people were displaced from their land, and they had the particular animals that they ate or farmed like taken away from them, and breaking that bond with nature actually broke them as people. I think in the modern world we've done that to ourselves. We have urbanized the world, we've got technology, we don't spend as much time in nature as we need to for our mental health, our physical health, and our longevity, and it's affected our mental health. And so, it's very common to feel like what you've just said. I had a conversation with a friend who had lost her father and her brother, and she said
mm,
something to me that I didn't understand at the time, but it took me some time to realize this is true. And I hope this really lands for your listeners, which is that if you can wake up today and say, I am alive and I'm in like good health, that's enough to be grateful for. So, I mean, that's quite extreme, but that, there are people who lose their fight against a terminal illness and die, and their life gets taken away from them. Or there are people who are, seriously unwell. I think if we're not either of those two things, I just really hope that people can try to find something to be
yes.
grateful for. And I usually say 10 things because five you can probably just about scrape, even if you're not in a great place. But when you push yourself to think of more than that, it really does make you realize that you do have things to be grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely. Like even after menopausal stage, I can still dance, I can still move around, I still do this and that. I mean, I was just thinking in my head the things I can write down that I
Mm,
can be thankful for about myself, but not
mm,
for what I have accomplished, which
yeah,
is usually, first in mind what I go for.
yeah.
But thank you. I will definitely try that today, starting today. And I hope everybody could do that as well. So for newbies, we've explained action boarding or vision board, and we talked about gratitude list, and we talked about checking in with your head, heart, and gut. Is there any
Mhm.
more things that's easy for people to practice that you can share?
Yeah, one that came into my mind when you were talking about people feeling negative is positive affirmations or mantras.
Mm,
Particularly if you have a recurring negative thought, like you gave some examples, like I'm not good enough, or I don't fit in, or I feel bullied, then create a sentence that is the opposite of that sentence. So this actually comes from Buddhism. Buddhism says replace every negative thought with a positive thought.
hmm.
Now, modern neuroscience through the neuroplasticity shows that you can't undo wiring that is in your brain. You have to overwrite it with something new. So it's like, ancient wisdom meets modern neuroscience. That's my favorite area of
Hmm.
intersection. So if you create an affirmation like, I am beautiful, I am confident, even if it doesn't feel true at first, repeat it and repeat it until it becomes more wired into your brain than the negative thought that you were having.
Right. As you're saying that, I can empathize with people who are having a hard time. Like, I am beautiful, I am confident. And when you go to school or you go to work and people laugh at you, or I moved to Australia when I was really, really young, and I
Mhm.
experienced that firsthand. Right? You go to school and then it's okay if you're ignored. But when people focus their attention on you and
Yeah,
actively bully you, I think that's really hard,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
I will say I did find a yoga book that my parents brought, and at that young age, I was probably 14 at the time. There was a page on meditation, and I tried it only
Mm.
because I had no other way of overcoming that,
Yeah.
because they didn't speak much English either. And so it was tough for them already. And so I was really lucky that I found that. And
Mm.
so that was the very first time I tried meditation and I tried visualization and it worked.
Wow.
But as I grew older, of course, I forgot about that. I started to fit in. I started to use my brain more. And then it was all brain, no heart, no gut. And later on, midlife crisis, and it changed again because the perturbation, right? Once you realize using your head is not enough, then you start to look for other alternatives. So, the reason why I'm mentioning this is that I want to let my audience know that I know maybe it's hard. Maybe the situation is really, really bad and you're having such a hard time now, but these are steps that you can take. And I think, Dr. Tara, you mentioned all the exercises that I think are wonderful. I've either tried it firsthand or I can just see how it would help me. So I do want to share with everybody. But obviously, it worked for you. And that's why you wrote the book. And I
Yeah.
remember watching an interview, and you talked about you had manifested your husband, your soulmate. So, can we
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I had been divorced for 7 years and I had basically become a workaholic. I was getting my self-esteem from my work. I was on my own, so, I could work like long hours, I could travel a lot for work. It took me 7 years to realize that I was doing that to protect myself from ever having my heart broken again.
Hmm.
So I thought, okay, you've manifested amazing business stuff, amazing travel, but, a previous book. And I thought, but if you really believe in this, you should show yourself that you can manifest love. And so in 2015, I put this tiny little heart on my vision board, but it was still mostly about business and travel. And I came to the end of that year and nothing had changed. And that's when I thought, no, come on, like I've got to mean this. And that's what I mean about the magnetic desire. You have to really actually want that thing. So I found a picture of a big engagement ring. I put it on the top left of my board. I had some like house things and some animal conservation stuff, a particular bathroom that I liked the look of and a garden because I wanted to get moved from my tiny apartment to somewhere with some outdoor space. And I saw this phrase. It was a Tiffany advert actually that said joy comes out of the blue. I don't normally put writing on my vision board, but it really spoke to me. So I put it on my vision board because what I say is before you glue the things down, lay them out, leave it for 24 hours, look at it. There might be things on there that you think you want, but they feel wrong on the board, and then you have to remove them. And you might find something in a magazine that you didn't know you wanted, but it speaks to you. So I made that board in December 2015. On the 2nd of February 2016, I was flying back to London from Johannesburg, and I met the man that was going to become my husband on that plane, out of the blue in the sky. And we got engaged
Amazing.
yeah,
And you got engaged when?
in the same year. So I met him February, got engaged in November, and he was actually renovating a house in the countryside at the time. And when I showed him my vision board, he said, "But that looks like our house." And it did. The garden area
No.
looked like the house that I'd never seen that was being renovated. And then the bathroom, I don't know if you can say I manifested it, but I made my bathroom look like what it was in the picture. But, I had the opportunity to have a bathroom that I could do up like that.
Right,
So,
right, right. You
yeah,
you had the opportunity to make it look like your vision board, and that's
yeah.
already a great thing. I mean, I was getting chills. That's so
And
crazy.
let me add, so, I said there was some animal conservations. I had a picture of a tiger and a rhino. And then when it came to the following year for our wedding, because we were, we'd both been married before and we had a household, we didn't really need things. We asked for people to donate to our favorite charities. And the one that I chose was a panther conservation charity. So
So,
it basically everything on that board came true
wait,
in 20.
why tiger and rhino on your vision board? I'm very
And
curious.
just like it wasn't really just about those animals, it was to represent that I really care about animal conservation.
I see. I wish I brought my vision board to show with you, but I truly believe in vision board and I have one now, but I will say I'm a little bit embarrassed to put it out there because I feel like my kids might laugh at me. So I have it next to my bed I mean, I had like a woman in a bikini because I was like, oh, I'm working towards that. But I feel like they'd laugh at me. But it's something I'm working towards, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I do feel closer to it. And I think it's important that what you said in the very beginning, it's something that's reachable, that's not too
Mm,
far off.
mhm.
Because when I was at my lowest, remember I told you I was pregnant and then I had my first kid and business was in trouble and the book The Secret was out. And so one of the things that it wrote was write a blank check to yourself. So I
Mm,
wrote $3 million to myself. It's like a vision board, but like inside my closet. So every day I open it, I see it, but it never manifested. And now that I was thinking back, it's because every time I looked at it, it was a reminder of how much money I actually don't have, as opposed to it's something that's reachable. So it actually probably triggered like cortisol every day when I looked at it. So I think what you said in the very beginning, and I do want to remind people, like put things down that resonates truly with you. But if you look at the picture, it triggers something else. Like there's no way in hell I will be like that, or I can have that, or I'll look like that. And I feel like it may not be the right picture for you to put on your vision board, per my own experience in the past.
Yeah, and another experience I've seen with people is that they find the images and they lay them out, but they don't glue them down. And every single time I've come across that, I've worked out it's because they don't feel they deserve those things.
Mm,
So your sense of deserving and worthiness is also really important in terms of the things that you choose and how likely you are to actually manifest them. If you don't believe that you're actually worthy, I don't want to make a huge generalization, but a lot of Asian women have to prove that they're worthy of like having life because let's be honest that, there were not my generation, but before my generation, there was a lot of infanticide of girl babies.
hmm
And often, Asian women do feel like they have to prove that they're good enough to kind of particularly be seen in their father's eyes as, super professional, super highly educated. But even though they are all those things, underneath is this feeling of like, I'm not actually really worthy.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. So the feeling of I don't deserve this, I think would resonate with a lot of people. Like I
Yeah.
already have a good. I shouldn't complain.
Yeah.
I shouldn't ask for more. Like that's not having enough gratitude,
Yeah.
right? So yes, that's a wonderful reminder. Like I said in the very beginning, I feel like I manifested this interview because your book really did help me a lot. And I've manifested a lot of things in the past 4 years since I started to listen to my heart and my gut.
Yeah.
So during COVID is when I started my channel. I mean, I was, 45, left my job, don't really know what to do next. Started a small consulting firm, thinking I'll just do consulting, then COVID happened. So I started to record videos. Then things just started happening. And I think it's
Wow.
because there was no resistance.
Yeah.
And you talk about resistance in your book because I wasn't expecting anything. I just was visualizing a general picture that of abundance, right? I didn't have anything specific because nothing was, visible at the horizon. Like I don't know what's going to happen. So it's
Mm.
a general feeling of abundance that I was hoping for. And
Yeah.
so then a publisher came. So I started writing the book, and then the channel started to gain momentum. So
Mm.
looking back, and I thought, well, I really did manifest all of this. And so right now, though, I've hit kind of a bottleneck. And so I'm sort of working through that. And I think it couldn't be a coincidence that we are talking today because I realized that I've tied my success with numbers. So when
Mhm.
I was manifesting or when I wasn't resisting,
Mm.
what I wanted to do was coming out of my heart. Like I do want to share information. I love doing this. So that's why I want to. And then later with that small amount of with that success, numbers. And then I started tying success with numbers. And when the numbers aren't as expected, I realize I've lost that joy or that feeling of anxiousness is overriding that joy. So,
Yeah.
what would you recommend for someone like me who have manifested things and understood that this can happen? We're at a place where, it's everything's tangled up and you all of a sudden think, well, things stopped moving, things stopped manifesting. Is there any advice you could give me?
Yeah, I mean, this actually really resonates with me. And what I've learned over time is that it comes in waves. There can be periods of months that you just feel like nothing is manifesting.
Mm,
And then suddenly, for reasons that I don't actually really particularly understand, but hopefully it's all the gratitude practice and the time in nature, suddenly it just switches. And so what I've learned is that when manifestations are coming in like you just can't believe, I don't know whether it's like the universe or the planets or some kind of cosmic force, whatever it is that's allowing that to happen at that time, that's when you should ask for everything that you want. Just know that basically your manifestation powers are high at that time and ask for everything that you want at that time. And then understand that it's not going to be like that, all the time.
right, right. Having that expectations, kind of like Stockdale paradox. Like sometimes crap happens. It's not always going to be smooth sailing. So I know that in my head, but I think sometimes I need to communicate that to my emotions, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
journaling can help with that.
Yes.
And I think what I've really personally found is that if it feels like, what I want isn't happening and I stress out about it, or I try to like force things to happen, it actually takes longer. If
Hmm.
I surrender, then sometimes it can turn around like the next day.
Yes. Surrendering is the key word. And then that's the hardest thing to do.
Mm.
And I think, both have experienced that before, but really we're urging people to give it a try. Like
Yeah.
surrender your fear, surrender all your worries, because you're only creating resistance. And I know this firsthand. I've had a lot of experience with that.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Tara.
Thank you. And by the way, you are amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tara. That's all.